The Second Amendment was written in a world of muskets and militias. But today we live in a world of drones, satellites, cyber warfare, and nuclear weapons. So the question is simple. Has the Second Amendment become something completely different from what the Founding Fathers intended? When America fought the British, it didn't have a professional army. The founders relied on local militias, the Continental Army, and foreign allies like France. They used militias because that was all they had. They lived in a world where a musket was the most advanced weapon and where citizens and governments had roughly comparable firepower. That world is gone. The Second Amendment was shaped directly by the colonists' experience with British military power. The British used soldiers to enforce control. They tried to seize colonial weapons. They quartered troops in private homes, and they acted without the consent of the governed. The founders feared not just the British, but any government that could use a standing army to dominate its own people. That fear became the foundation of the Second Amendment. But the founders could never have imagined drones that strike from across the world, nuclear bombs capable of erasing cities, satellite surveillance, cyber warfare, armored vehicles, rapid response police forces, or intelligence agencies with global reach. They feared tyranny because they had lived under it, but they could not imagine a world where one person's ego could influence events on a global scale. For most of American history, the Second Amendment was interpreted as a militia-related right, not an individual one. But in the late 20th century, the conversation shifted. Advocacy groups, scholars, and political movements reframed the amendment as an individual right. Then in 2008, the Supreme Court ruled that the Second Amendment protects an individual's right to own a firearm for self-defense in the home. This was a major reinterpretation, not a continuation of the founders' original intent. And here's where the modern contradiction becomes impossible to ignore. The Second Amendment is described as a fundamental right, but unlike other fundamental rights, it is heavily regulated. You need a license. You need background checks. You can lose the right permanently if you're convicted of certain offenses, even after serving your sentence and paying your debt to society. So imagine this. One citizen with a license becomes emotionally enraged, while another citizen who made a mistake years ago is legally forbidden from owning a firearm. Does that mean one person's life is more worth defending than the other? Legally, the system says no, but practically, the system creates a hierarchy of who is allowed to defend themselves with the most effective means. And that raises a deeper question. If a fundamental right can be permanently removed, is it still a right, or has it become a privilege? And that question matters because the Second Amendment was originally written as a safeguard, a last line of defense against government overreach. But in the modern world, the protection against government abuse doesn't come from the Second Amendment at all. It doesn't come from armed citizens. It comes from something the founders never had, a legal requirement that police and military refuse unlawful orders. Today, the system protects citizens by making it illegal for government forces to follow illegal commands. That safeguard lives in constitutional oaths, military codes, federal law, and international law, not in the Second Amendment. The amendment doesn't create that protection. It doesn't enforce it. It doesn't guarantee it. And that's the shift. The founders relied on militias because they had no internal guardrails. We rely on internal guardrails because militias can't counter modern power. The founders designed the Constitution in a world that was basically two-dimensional. Power moved slowly. Weapons were simple. Consequences were local. Today, power operates in four dimensions: time, space, technology, and consequence. A single decision can travel across the world in seconds. A miscalculation can destabilize entire regions. A moment of overconfidence can trigger a chain reaction no one can control. In the 1700s, scratching on the last ball meant losing political power. Today, scratching can mean something far worse: a crisis with consequences that ripple across borders and generations. Because in a nuclear world, the danger of scratching isn't embarrassment. It's a catastrophe. The founders didn't write the Second Amendment as a plan for violence. They wrote it as a warning, a reminder that no government, no leader, and no institution is immune to the human tendency to overreach. The real threat isn't the weapons, it's the overconfidence behind them. The belief that someone can run the table forever, the illusion of being untouchable, until the moment they scratch. And in a four-dimensional world, that scratch can change everything. The Second Amendment is one of the most debated parts of the Constitution, not because people misunderstand it, but because the world around it has changed. What began as a safeguard against tyranny in a young nation has become a modern conversation about rights, safety, identity, and responsibility. And that's why the debate continues. Because the real question isn't just, what did the founders mean? It's, what should this amendment mean today? If this breakdown gave you something to think about, make sure you like, subscribe, and share. And stay tuned for another episode of What is Going On Media, where we make the complicated clear.